Beach FM, locals talking to locals.
Beach FM, and I'd like to make very welcome now the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Kapiti Aeroclub, Tony Quayle. Good morning and welcome to you.
Good morning to you, John.
Tony, I've heard that there's some conjecture over the future of Kapiti Airport, and I imagine the Kapiti Aeroclub has got a point of view. What is it?
Okay, so we first heard about this almost 3 weeks ago now. We were told initially by the national candidate for Otaki that he broke the news over the weekend that he had gotten wind of the fact that the new owners of Kapiti Aeroclub, Kapiti Airport, should I say, that they had acquired as part of a major portfolio that they'd purchased from Todd Property. Now, that they were planning to close the airport, and the indications from Tim Costley were that the airport would close as early as about now, early to mid-September. So immediately that blew us out of the water. We met with the owners, or a representative of the owners, on Monday the 10th of August, so almost 3 weeks ago now, and while he didn't say it would be closing in September, he painted a very bleak picture of the economic viability of the airport and also their safety concerns about the likely departure of the flight information service in the control tower at the airport. That flight information service, Airways Corporation that operates the service, had announced probably in about April or May that they were going to close a number of control towers around the country, and Paraparaumu was one of them. So that played into the picture that was painted for us on that Monday 3 weeks ago. I guess we were shell-shocked at that stage, thinking that we really only had weeks left to operate.
The first you heard was from Tim Costley, and what you heard from the new owners of the airport, when I say new, because they are relatively recent, it was late last year, they had not contacted you before that stage.
No, in fact, we had been seeking to talk to the new owners ever since they took over the portfolio that included the airport. Had requested through the local airport chief executive, who's an employee of theirs, requested through him repeatedly an opportunity to discuss our situation at the airport, which in particular was about expanding our operation, building a new hangar, because we have so much flying going on, so many aeroplanes, both club-owned and member-owned, that we were really, really pressed for space. We remain really pressed for space, and were wanting to lease more land off them and build a hangar. Now, we'd initially raised that with Todd Property, and it was stalled there, and our early requests to meet with the owners, the new owners, were met with silence for quite some time. When we knew that there was going to be a meeting on that Monday, when we'd been advised of that, we were expecting that that's what we would be talking about. We had no inkling at all until Tim Costley dropped that bombshell that it might be closure of the airport. We were expecting to talk about building a new hangar.
Well, that, to say the very least, is bad form. Incidentally, you mentioned about your need for extra hangar space. I believe that July was a record
month. Yeah. We clocked up 400 hours of flying. It's revenue flying in that month. That doesn't include members flying their own aircraft, but this is the revenue that went through the club.
Yes.
400 hours, which was well and truly a record. I think the best we'd done before was some tens of hours below that for a month. So quite significant, really, considering the uncertainty coming out of lockdown and uncertainty over people's future incomes and all that sort of thing. But we bounced back very, very well. Even in May, June, we had really good results considering we'd just come out of lockdown. We resumed flying around the middle of May when we went down to level 2, and there was an immediate pickup from zero flying during April, of course, and immediately picked right up and reached that peak in July.
How significant is the Kapiti Aeroclub, and what does it contribute to our community?
Well, primarily it's a training institution. So we have around 258 members at present. It changes by the day as people join and some fade away. As I say, primarily, and roughly half of our flying is training people initially to their private pilot licence, and then beyond that, in some cases, a smaller number to their commercial licence, instrument ratings, those sorts of things. So we have a lot of young people coming through the club out of this community and from other communities wanting to move towards aviation careers, airline jobs in the main.
Sure.
In terms of what it contributes to the community, really, it's a dynamic institution, employs a number of people locally, and trains up a number of people locally. And of course, all those people are spending money in the businesses, like cafes, and depending whether they live there, spending some of their money in all sorts of local businesses. So it's fairly significant, and I'm sure for many residents, a majority of residents, from what we understand from the Colmar-Brunton poll that the council conducted a couple of years ago, that something like 94% of respondents saw the airport as an important part of the local infrastructure.
And it's quite an airport, isn't it, in that it's right in the heart of the community. That's most unusual. Most airports are way out in the wop somewhere, but this is right in the centre, this one.
Yeah, of course, really Kapiti has grown up around the airport, right? Paraparaumu has grown up around the airport. So the land was taken from basically farmers and Maori owners back in around 1938 to build a military airport initially. And Paraparaumu was a fairly small town there. A few people had bachelors and nothing like it is now. So the community has really grown around it. So it was fairly rural initially, fairly much a backwater, but it's become a thriving local community. And growing, of course, it continues to grow with Transmission Gully coming on stream next year. We're all expecting that there will be a lot more people coming to the coast, living on the coast, and also coming out there to use our services, for example. So it will be so much easier for people from Wellington, the Hutt Valley, northern suburbs of Wellington, to come out our way. And of course, everybody that comes up here spends some money in the community. So it's good for everyone, really.
Tony Quayle, President and CEO of the Kapiti Aeroclub. Now, I've never done this before, but he's coming back tomorrow. We're going to continue the interview, having got the background to the Aeroclub and its place in the community. We're going to have a look at the issues relating to the future, if there is one, of the Kapiti Airport.
Beach FM, locals talking to locals.
Beach FM, yesterday we had a chat to Tony Quayle, CEO of the Kapiti Aeroclub, and we got some of the background of the club and its meaning for the local community. Now we move on to the Kapiti Airport and its importance to our area, but also a little bit of history. You'll be aware that Murray Cole and three Kapiti businessmen bought the airport in 1995 for just over $1.6 million. There was an alternative consortium that was made up of local aviation interests that put in a bid at that time. And now Tony Quayle continues the story as we have a look at what happened from then. Here on Beach FM.
There was certainly a group of local aviation people who operated on the airfield that were seeking to buy the airfield and operate it back in 1995, and unfortunately the process didn't go that way, and that was where For the first time, it went into the hands of property developers, and really it has gone that way ever since. Subsequent owners have really been totally focused on the commercial return that they can get from the land. And interestingly, when Sir Noel Robinson purchased the airfield, I guess around 20 years ago now, maybe a little less than that, and sought a district plan change in order to establish what's now the business park. We have Mitre 10, New World, Placemakers, and various other businesses. The plan change was predicated or argued on the basis that revenue from the business park would help support the continued viability of the airfield.
That's right.
Now that's not inconsistent with what happens at some of the large airfields around the country. So, you look at Auckland Airport, they don't make that much money from the aircraft arrivals and departures, but they make a heap of money from associated businesses, obviously all the retail inside the terminal, the car parking, and even in the area around, there's leases for various aviation and freight-related businesses.
Yes, that was the community solution, wasn't it? That the business development, which was controversial in its time because we lost the cross one way, but that was going to supply the money that would make it, as a package, a viable option. And that's what we went along with after much controversy. But let's go back to that original sale process. That sale process has been criticised by a parliamentary select committee, by the Auditor General, by a judge in the High Court, and it's currently under Waitangi Tribunal consideration, and it certainly is by no means a clean process, which has been controversial ever since. But the fact is, Tony, that the land is now in private ownership, and do you think that the time has come where we've got to come up with an alternative way of owning and running the airport?
Well, there's no doubt, John, that as long as the airfield is in private hands and continues to change hands the way it has, that sooner or later it's going to be closed for more profitable commercial development, be it residential or light industrial, commercial, retail, whatever, or some mix of those things. That if the community wants to have an airport, and all the indications are that it does, and it adds, according to the council figures, around $4.5 million to commercial benefit to the region per annum. That as long as the community feels that way, realistically, and in my opinion, the only way that its future can be secured is if it is returned to some form of community ownership. Now, that sweeping community ownership term encompasses the involvement of the hapu. Hapu are speaking very eloquently about their claim, and understandably so. The council must have some interest, and central government must have some interest. The airfield has quite a lot of strategic importance in terms of civil defence issues. What happens if Wellington Airport is closed after an earthquake, for example, or a big storm, even sea level rise that starts to affect Wellington Airport, then Kapiti acts as a secondary option for the Wellington region. We know it's significantly used for emergency or air ambulance and rescue helicopter operations. And one interesting fact is that starting in a week or two's time, Wellington Airport, due to some overnight works that are going on there, will be closed overnight. And the Westpac rescue helicopter will not be able to operate at Wellington Airport, and will be relying on Paraparaumu during that period through till about the end of the year. So, that's a one-off event, but it's the sorts of things that happen. The airfield is well equipped with fueling facilities, terminal facilities, and all those sorts of operations can easily be conducted there. they can't be. It would be significantly more difficult if the Paraparaumu airfield didn't exist. And from our point of view, for recreational pilots and what we call general aviation, which is sort of all of the non-airline operations, Paraparaumu is a significant en route stopping point. It's the last place that you can easily pick up fuel before crossing Cook Strait or after crossing Cook Strait. So anyone flying up and down the country and between the islands really does depend on Paraparaumu being there. Now, some people can fly direct, say from Nelson to Wanganui, but you're talking long stretches over the water, certainly not desirable in single-engine light aircraft. So it's a very, very critical place. And you look at the weather outside today with low cloud and drizzle and so on. If someone was thinking about crossing Cook Strait, they maybe got down the coast towards Paraparaumu, well, they might take a look at Cook Strait and say, right, well, I'll be staying here, and there's obviously a community of accommodation and aircraft storage and all that sort of stuff that's secure, and not taking the risk of heading off into the unknown simply because there's no bolt hole locally here.
Well, you make a very good point, the safety concerns there, and there's really not very much to land on between Wellington and the Manawatu. It's really just the Kapiti Airport, isn't it?
Yeah, well, obviously there's Palmerston North and Wanganui regional airports, good facilities, but they're quite a lot further away.
Yes.
There's a small airfield at Otapi and another at Foxton. And also Fielding. Apart from Fielding, Palmerston North and Wanganui, neither of those other airfields have fuel.
Right.
I believe Foxton, is known as Fox Pine, is getting fuel, which will be great. But that's still quite a long way from Cook Strait. Really.
Sure. Tony, what happens to the Kapiti Aeroclub if there's no Kapiti if there's no Kapiti Airport?
Well, we have a long history at this airfield back into the early 80s, and we are, after all, the Kapiti Aeroclub. There has been talk of whether we could be moved somewhere else, and suggestions have included Fox Pine and Masterton, but realistically, the Kapiti Aeroclub, as we know it, would cease to exist if it couldn't operate out of Paraparaumu airfield.
You mentioned Masterton there. It has been proposed that the Hood Airdrome would be fill the same kind of role as Paraparaumu Airport in terms of being the backup to Wellington. I find that difficult to accept because it's a difficult road access across the Rimatakas to the Wairarapa, and it just wouldn't compare to the Kapiti Airport, particularly with Transmission Gully just around the corner.
Yeah, absolutely. The accessibility of Kapiti is only going to get easier and easier. Connections between Wellington City and Kapiti will be so much more streamlined in just a few months' time, really. Certainly in the horizon that we're talking about for the sorts of development that's coming along. And Masterton, as you say, is a relatively difficult drive, comparatively difficult drive. I actually did my private pilot licence training in Masterton and commuted over there most Saturdays for almost a year, possibly a little over a year, in fact. And it's a tiresome business trying to drive over there. And,
yes.
I live in Pukenua Bay, and an hour and a half each way.
Yeah.
No matter which way I cut it, really, it was always an hour and a half. And that meant 3 hours of driving for typically 2 hours of flying. It made for a fairly major undertaking to go over there for each day of training.
That's right. And of course, as soon as the wind blows, the Rimatakas are out anyway, so it's not the easiest access across to the Wairarapa. One final question, Tony. We've heard that the runway requires about $4.5 million for a do-up. What's your assessment of the state of the runway?
Well, from our point of view, as an Aero Club, the sealed runway is perfectly fine, doesn't have any issues. I can't really speak from an engineering point of view on what they may have found, but the seal's not breaking up significantly, noticeably at all from our perspective. And we know that Air Chatham's Sounds Air are operating perfectly happily off it. Even if it did need major work, there could be some pragmatic decisions made about the width of the runway, for example. It's 45 metres wide, which really harks back to its origins, and the fact that it was, for a time, Wellington Airport.
Yep.
Remember, back until the current Wellington Airport opened in, I think, 1959, the DC-3s and the like that were connecting us with Auckland and Christchurch were all flying in and out of Paraparaumu. So realistically, I question whether it needs a 45-metre wide runway strip, sealed runway strip. Arguably, it could be half of that, 2/3 of that. And that would obviously help reduce the cost of resealing it if that's required, if and when that's required. Unfortunately, it's very easy for people to talk some of these things up, and we have a feeling that these issues are being talked up. That includes the safety issues about the likely loss of the flight information service. So a lot of these things are being exaggerated, we believe, by the owners in order to justify their desire to shut the airport.
Tony, I believe there's a meeting on Saturday to save the Kapiti Airport. Will the Aeroclub be part of that?
We certainly will be part of the public meeting when it happens. Now, I understand from Tim Costley, who is organising this, that it's being postponed yet again due to the extended COVID level 2 here. So I'd have to check the date, but I believe it's been pushed out maybe another couple of weeks towards late September.
Goodness me, it's a moving piece, this one, and certainly it's a moving argument. It's not over yet. Tony Quayle, thank you very much for your time here on Beach FM and informing us about the importance of the airport. CEO of the Aeroclub, Tony Quayle, thank you for your company this morning.
It's been a pleasure, John. Cheers.
106.3 Beach FM.